So let me tell you what I found underneath my Christmas tree. You remember that one hoe? No, I'm kidding. There's no hoe. Welcome back, ladies and
Change the
gentlemen.
subject.
Let me tell you, she was a naughty. No, man, I'm kidding. Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Glenn Lawrence, and this is
Shah McCool.
And most people think they understand child support, but they don't. All right. They understand the slogan, they understand the rage clips, they understand the pain, but they don't understand how the system actually works, who sets the numbers, why people fall behind, or what incentivizes quietly drives the outcome. And that's where we are going to be breaking that down today.
Yeah, because once a child is involved, we have to remember that the conversation stops being about a theory and it's more about, like, people tend to want to make it about winning the argument, like being right. And that's not what it's about. Unfortunately, the whole system, uses the money and the time and the access and everything just like kind of erodes. So it's definitely today's guests, we are definitely going to be getting into inside the system, and we're going to be talking about what people argue and why things are not getting solved.
Exactly. So you ready?
Yes, let's go.
Let's do it.
Energy of truth on fire. They're calling out the world's desire. From fake ideals to moral decay, they're lighting up the modern age. No one's safe, not the church, not fame. They're flipping the script, rewriting.
Shah, welcome.
Hey there. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. So before we get into opinions or culture takes, like what it starts with something, let's just start with something a little bit more simple. All right, let's start with the easy questions.
Sounds good to me.
Who are you? How did you end up here? And how did you end up in the child support division?
Well, okay. Well, to begin with, who am I? I go by This Is Shah on YouTube. You can just call me Shah. And yeah, I don't work at child support anymore, but I did work there for 5 years until, recently. And, child support itself didn't actually bring me to the space. I actually used to read the old Red Pill subreddit way back then in like 2013 and stuff like that. I was just getting out of college and stuff. And so I'd always kind of kept an eye on it, and I'd read the stuff and find it interesting. And then, a couple of years after that, about 2016-ish, I started working at child support as a child support officer. And this is over here in California, right? So at first, I never really understood how many layers there was to child support. I thought, I'm like, oh, this is an interesting job. I was kind of looking for something to do out of college. And I have a buddy of mine actually was like, hey, we should apply to this together, because he was looking for something too. And I ended up getting the job. And then as I worked there, I would read these kind of like stories on the Red Pill subreddit, because it wasn't always just about like pickup and stuff. There was also guys going through divorces and all
like
that stuff. And I'm like,
the meat grinder.
Yeah, going through the meat grinder and all this kind of stuff. And then when I started working there, I really got a deep look into the system. I mean, I've seen thousands of divorce dissolution judgments. I've seen child support orders. I've done the cheek swabs for the genetic tests and all that kind of stuff. I've calculated child support. And then working through there, I really started to see kind of what happens to people, you know what I mean? And I would see families disintegrating, and I would just see people having kids out of wedlock, and first baby daddy, second baby daddy, first baby mama, second baby mama, ex-wife, the new this, the new that, and just saw how wiry that was. And then I really learned how that whole system was connected to our welfare system and all this kind of stuff. So after I stopped working there, I would listen to the space just in general, as a casual listener. And I would always hear things about child support and stuff like that I felt like weren't exactly accurate. So, after a while I was like, maybe I'll start making some stuff in the space and seeing if I can talk to people and correct things as I heard it out there.
So that's a good it was like right into my next question, because I'm sure that when before you start working in that department, you probably had your own ideas of what it was, right? What was the idea before you start working there? And then after you start working, what was a belief that completely collapsed for you?
Gosh, to be honest, like I I never thought about it that much. Like I'd heard of it,
Mm.
but I just never thought about family law that deeply. And to be honest with you, most of the guys on the other side of the table that I talked to never did as well until they were talking to me. And then it was like their first run in with the system. And then they were going to learn how things went, like, well,
Mhm.
it's, there's all these mythologies people throw out there, and I might have believed them too. Like, oh, if it's not my kid, then why are you asking me for child support? I learned that wasn't true. I mean, it can totally not be your biological child, but you can be legally the
Ask
father
Neo.
of the child to pay. Yeah. So there's all that kind of thing. Another myth would be like, well, if it's 50-50 custody, why do I have to pay? That's certainly you can be paying if it's 50-50 custody, so long as you're the higher earner.
Yep.
There was just a ton of things there. People often think child support and custody are the same thing or they're related, but
Mm.
the child support agency I worked in, like, we don't have any power to touch child custody. That's across the street in the private family law court.
Yeah.
We just put in our calculator whatever comes out from that. And even sometimes we don't if the parents tell us something different. But there were just all these little intricacies in the system that lead to different outcomes than you would otherwise expect.
So let's ground this process. Like, walk
Mhm.
me through a child support case from start to finish. Like, no emotions, no politics, just
Mhm.
how does it actually work?
Sure. Well, fundamentally, child support is a lawsuit, right? And there is no
Mhm.
child support without a judgment, without a court somewhere saying so and so owes X amount of dollars for such and such child born on this date, effective on this date. Okay.
Mhm.
And there are different ways child support can start. Now, before you get to the money, you had to actually prove someone has paternity over a child, right?
Paternity or legal
Parentage.
responsibility, right?
Yeah, and paternity doesn't always mean biological paternity. We mean legal paternity, right? So parentage.
Mm.
So that can happen in a couple different ways. And if there are people who have kids within wedlock and then outside of wedlock, right? And a lot of why child support exists was because a lot of people were starting to have kids out of wedlock. And in 1975, the American Congress decided to make the, child support enforcement bill or, act, and that created what we were doing here. But either we have to establish parentage now, and then if you're married and you got divorced, by virtue of your wife issuing a child in the marriage, you're legally presumed
Assumed.
to be the father. Yeah.
Yeah.
The legal word is presumption. Paternity presumption is what they call
Yeah.
it. In
Because
California,
they're assuming fidelity.
they're assuming fidelity. Yeah. And it really gets pretty deep in that, and when genetic tests came on the fray, sorry if I'm going off here, but
No, you're good.
that brought up a whole issue because prior to genetic tests, it was very hard. There really was no definitive way to say this person is biologically the father. They had blood tests for a bit towards like the 70s, but that was pretty rudimentary. So prior to that, we have decades and decades of law that assign parentage status based off of other factors that weren't genetic tests, right? And then there started happening like all these custody challenges. So an affair partner for a married woman might say, hey, that's really my child and I want custody with my child, right? And then the husband might say, hey, wait, this is my family. I don't want some other guy coming in and, this is our whatever it is, right? The institution of marriage needs, this went all the way up to the Supreme Court and they decided to uphold marriage over paternity. So this is why sometimes in the law
Oh.
you can end up being the dad even after a divorce because they don't want to weaken the institution of marriage anymore. That's how it all went down. It's a long story. But
So
yeah.
just real quick, like a follow-up question to that is like, so would you say it's because of men fighting for the sanctity of the marriage or like the structure of the
Mhm.
marriage? The men at that point automatically prioritized the role that he had over paternity.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I would put it more to society at large because I think people look at marriage and they're like, it's better to keep people married or have people within marriage as better for society than the other way around. So as the laws kind of stack on each other, it sort of ended up that way. So like in California, you have 2 years from the birth of your child to challenge paternity if you're
Yes.
within a marriage, to undo presumption. And even then, it's not guaranteed that the court's going to say, hey, okay, you're not the dad, right? Because they might look at other things like, okay, who is the dad of this child? Oh, he died in a car accident, a year ago. So now this kid has no child, has no father. So the judge might decide to make a different decision, right? It all really depends what the situation is. But going back, these kinds of rulings and things like that have a kind of reverberating effect on what you can and can't do, basically. So it gets really complex like that. So that's all within marriage, and a lot of guys do end up surprised when what's the average marriage last, like 7 years or something.
Yeah.
When divorce one comes, let's say you had a kid and the kid's 5 now, so that's way past the 2-year limit, right? So now you're in this precarious position, and she might have been like, screw you, I cheated on you, while they were fighting during the divorce, and he's like, hey, that's not my child. And then the judge is like, well, according to family code so and so, you still got to pay child support. And that's where a lot of the anger and stuff comes in and things like that. That's just the married people, right? Then outside of that, you have to establish paternity if you don't have a paternity presumption. So that would be, so back when people started having a lot of kids out of wedlock, what they created was this program called the Voluntary Declaration of Paternity. Basically, it's an acknowledgement paperwork. And what they found through studies was that when kids are born out of wedlock, a lot of the times at the birth of the child, the parents are still together. So what they did is they created this form that you signed alongside the birth certificate that is for the father to acknowledge paternity in the hospital. So if you're not married, but you're in the hospital and you sign that form, then
basically
it gets filed
to get
with
your
the
name
state.
on the birth certificate, right?
Well, it varies from state. In some states, the birth certificate might count as paternity, but you can even have your name on the birth certificate in California, but if you didn't sign the VDP, then paternity wouldn't have been established, right? So this document gets filed with the state, and it carries the weight of a legal judgment. It's the same thing as saying, I adopted the child, or a judge made me the father, right? Then if you don't have that, then what you have to do is you have to actually sue the person. So mom comes in and names somebody, says so-and-so is the dad, and I have to work backwards to find the guy, basically, which child support is also a story about big data. I don't want to get lost down that road, but I'll tell you this, from someone's cell phone number, I can work, even if I don't have a name, if I have their real cell phone number, I can go back and find that person's whole identity and social security number and past addresses and stuff. But anyways, that's fun. So from there, once we find that, then we have to sue the person and we have to serve them. And from there, since no paternity is established, they can ask for a genetic test, or they can sign and accept paternity at our office, or they can challenge it and it'll go to court and a judge will make them. And if they just ignore us, we'll just default them as the father, even if they're not. So I saw that happen a lot too. So, okay, now you get paternity out of the way. Now we know who dad is, biologically or not, but legally speaking. And then comes in the calculator, right? So in the meantime, while we're figuring out paternity, I'm also looking at income data. So in the mid 90s, when they really beefed up child support, they created a lot of these databases like National Directory of New Hires and all that kind of stuff. And anybody who's hired somewhere, it gets ported in there and they send over income data to us. And then so I'm sitting at my desk, and once I punch in their social security number into this software that we have, it shows us their earnings going way back. So we can look at those earnings. We can then, reach out to the employer, try to get a work verification for them, paychecks, and then we punch that into a calculator, right? And this calculator,
the calculator determines like the percentage that is considered would be the cost for child care.
Yeah. Well, child care was something that we did as a separate add-on from child support proper. So child care would be for like daycare and things like that. But yeah, so then we would start to, we would talk to mom and dad, try to figure out custody, punch that into the calculator, look at the incomes, punch in the incomes, and it would spit out a number, so that's where we go. And then we say, hey, court, we're trying to sue this guy for child support. We're trying to, number one, establish he's the father. You saw this in the Elon Musk, Ashley St. Clair filings, right? Yeah. Before they said anything about child support, it says to establish Elon Musk as the father of this child, which revealed to us that he never acknowledged, paternity of this. Then it was like, okay, now let's also get child support going. So once we get all that legally established, then we would take that brand new shiny order and we would send that over to our enforcement division. And then they start calling you every month. They try to do a wage garnishment. If you're not paying, they're going to suspend your licenses, whether that's a fishing license, a driving license, or a license to practice law or medicine, whatever the hell it was.
Professional license will be on the chopping block.
Yeah, or they'll do bank levies. Like we used to do all kinds of stuff. If your parents had a house that they owned, we would put and you hadn't paid for a long time, we would put I want to use the word levy, a lien on that house.
How could you put a lien on a house
that's
not theirs?
Right?
I'm sorry, what was that?
It's like a cloud, no? They put like a cloud on the title, so when you go try to sell it, you can't.
Yeah, so when it goes through probate, so if the parents pass away and all that, then we can try to attach that through probate. But yeah, the tentacles and all this stuff of child support went into a lot of different things, basically. And then the other way, if they already have a divorce judgment, we would just try to modify into that. So that would save us time. A lot of time a divorce judgment will tell you, even if you it'll say the children of the marriage are, and they'll list the kids. And that might be within the 2 years or not, but that was a court finding of paternity as we looked at it. So at bottom, to sum up, child support really is a lawsuit, and it is this legal thing that we have to establish, right? So we need a court to say you have to pay, and then once we have that, then we can start collecting, and then there's interest on back pay in a lot of states and all these things.
When you say court, right? So I'm trying to find out who's deciding the actual amount. When you say court, is it the judges? Is there a system that it goes through that has to validate that amount and say you have to pay that amount?
So a lot of the times, and this is for ease of process, because there's so many cases going through this. Originally, it would go through private family law court. And as these cases really started going up and welfare was being given out. Now, and just to remember, child support federally was created to recoup welfare tax dollars because welfare was created for widows of World War I, and there was a lot of orphans. Then around the 70s, they found that a lot of people that were on the welfare rolls actually had, men that were still alive to the children they had. They just weren't living together. So they created that. But to answer your question, there became this standardization of child support. So in order for states to receive welfare funds from the government, they needed to do child support the way the federal government wanted them to do. So it's a carrot stick approach. It's like, hey, if you want to have a welfare program that receives federal funding, you need to comply to these guidelines. One of those guidelines is having a child support calculator. Okay, so every state has to create one of these, and it needs to be approved from, I think, OCSC, the Office of Child Support Enforcement, which is under the executive, administration. And what'll happen is a lot of family codes in the state, they have that calculator, but the judges also have the ability to deviate if they write the reasons why they're deviating. So at the end of the day, child support court's mostly commissioners, but if it's private family law, then it's a real judge. Either of them can deviate from what the calculator says if they find a reason. This also goes back to the Elon Musk Ashley St. Clair case, because some people were saying, well, there's limits on child support in Texas and New York. So, but if you look closely at the law, either of those places can deviate from what the calculator says, right?
Yeah, there's more. The judges have more freedom, and it's not based on so much a structured facts. There's not a mandatory minimum.
No, it's based off lifestyle. It's exactly. Lifestyle of the parents, right? So yeah, and this is the thing about Elon Musk is that you remember when Ashley Clare first came out, she had this PR representative guy, and she basically came out with this story of Elon Musk's status essentially has created hardship and mental anguish for her based off who he is, to where she doesn't want to leave her apartment because all these
because
he's
also working with Trump and Doge and all this stuff.
Yeah.
She was having, yeah.
The point of that, in my opinion, was to be able to beef up need. To say, well, now I need 24-hour security. I need to live behind the palace walls. You know what I mean? All that stuff is expensive. $30,000 a month isn't going to cut it. This is Elon Musk's kid, arguably the highest profile, guy in the world. I mean, maybe after Trump, number 2, if you want to say, whatever. So our need is something that is outside of what's normally happening. And then, they ended up sealing up the case, so we're not able to follow along with it anymore. But that explains a lot of what they were doing. And she hired an attorney that worked on like one of Donald Trump's divorces. And it's like, if it was just going to easily max out this calculator, then why hire all these people? It's about creating a sophisticated argument to say, hey, we need to deviate from the guideline for these reasons.
That makes sense.
That was a long-winded answer.
Okay.
And where did it, so like, I mean, that kind of explains like the automation, right, of the formula, like that you just kind of ran through that as well.
Yeah. Most normal people are going to get ran through the formula aspect of this.
Yeah.
I used to call it the McDonald's Happy Meal of divorces and child support orders, right? Most people aren't going to have the money to hire an attorney to create these complex, sophisticated legal arguments for deviations, and it ends up being a lot. So the child support system that we have is like, I kind of imagine like heavy machinery trying to pick up a bunch of dirt, and some people really get caught in the teeth of that. It's not like how it used to be. In the story of family law is a direct separation of private family law and public family law. Public meaning if your family couldn't get it together and you need taxpayer dollars to support yourself, you are now a burden on the public, which means the state now has a right to come in and say, hey, these are the things you need to do, and this is the stuff we need to do to get this right. Private family law was for private citizens and private families who would go to private court. What happened was you saw a merger or a kind of welfarization of private family law into this one system. Because what happened was welfare was going up, kids being born out of wedlock and then going on welfare was becoming way too much. They had to do welfare reform in the 90s to try to limit it, and what they did was they beefed up child support. And what that did also was it led to a lot of standardization of family codes across the states, which means that a lot of these public aspects of family law have now encroached into the private family law system. So even if your family has never been on welfare before, you are still subject to the same state guideline calculator that was essentially designed for, these welfare sort of.
So they didn't have
issues.
like two different systems. It wasn't like a 2-tier system anymore.
In the past, they used to, yeah. But then it was kind of joined like that. So that's how you get normal, hardworking families that end up getting crunched from the family law, machine that we now have.
With that being said, like most people, like there's always two groups of people. Some people think that the court system is really like moral, like they think that it's a good thing. And then you have the other side that thinks it's completely evil. With what you just said, what incentives go on inside that we don't have eyes to that, like that you worked inside of it. So what the court system, why do they do the joining? Why?
Well, I'll say this, as far as incentives goes, like me at a child support agency, we had these things called performance measures, and these are federal performance measures. So federal money, taxpayer dollars, is going out to the state and saying, here's millions of dollars for you to give out for welfare. Now we're going to grade you on how much of that money that you collect back in the form of child support from fathers who aren't in the house or don't have custody of their children. So we would have these like federal performance measures. One of them was establishing court orders. How many orders did you establish? How much paternity did you establish? That was one of them. How much child support did you collect? How much arrears did you collect? What was your cost efficiency in terms of running the agency versus how much you collected on the back end? And if you look at it, the way these work based off how you perform, you get bigger incentive payments from the federal government, right? So the government and the courts have these incentives to get as many orders as they can to establish paternity, which doesn't mean following up on biological truth. It means having a person's name associated with the child on paper, is these numbers go up, and then they get more incentive payments from the federal government, which some of it goes into the state general fund, which can be used for other things and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of built in that way. And, a lot of it is about wealth transference. I think a lot of this probably rolls into discussions about feminism and things like that. And in the 90s, this whole push for women can do anything. I think a lot of that was to get women off of welfare in order to get them as productive money-making citizens. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, give them welfare now. They did TANF because it used to be you could just live off welfare even as an adult.
Yeah.
Then in the mid-90s, it went from AFDC, aid to families with dependent children, to TANF, which was temporary aid to needy families. And then the parents were supposed to be limited to 2 years. and then the children could be on it for a full 18-year cycle, basically. And sometimes you'll see people having kids to try to catch this as it ends, but that's another thing. And it was supposed to be about, okay, you know, the Republicans and the Democrats reached across the aisle and they shook hands and they figured this out. But all it did was make like this really strong child support system, which was modeled off of the IRS, basically. That's literally what it was like. They wanted it to have that much power, you know. And it really hasn't solved the issue. I'll say this. I mean, it's worse than ever. It's not like families are getting back together.
Yeah.
It used to be child support from the federal side was just about working on cases from welfare. But then what happened is they started giving incentive payments to states to say, hey, start advertising your services to families that are not on welfare. And the idea was supposed to be that, well, you're going to stop people from slipping into welfare if you can get to them first. But if you look at studies, there are some good papers written on like the effects of child support enforcement, especially on poor and needy families. It tends to have like a negative effect. You know, it'll kill the relationship between the father and the child. Because, you know, especially if they can't make the payments, then they stop seeing their kid altogether. And then it's just this guy who owes money in the system, and he just lives under the table. And
now he's called a deadbeat.
Now he's a deadbeat. Yeah, you know, yeah, back then when deadbeat dad came along, back then they had the welfare queen and the deadbeat dad, and these were words that were in the cultural mythos at the time. But basically, in my opinion, I think a lot of these changes that we did to the law just enabled people to make different decisions that aren't exactly like family, you know, creating and sustaining, right? So all of that stuff really pushed us, I think, into the world that we live in now. And now, you know, and of course, around the same time, well, in the late 60s, we used to have at-fault divorce, and then that got moved into no-fault.
Yeah.
So it's just like a recipe for disaster. And then, you know, now you have things like the manosphere and the red pill that are finally, after enough damage has been done, they're trying to figure out what do we do about this now.
Well, see, that kind of brings me up to a good question here. So, because I would say that, you know, and I'm probably going to detour a little bit here, but would you say, I mean, I believe that the child support division is not about children at all. I think they use the child. We are here to on the benefit of the child. We want to make sure that the child has money.
Yeah,
but how
best interest
actually
of the child.
Yeah, but like you don't get money if you are not taking something off of what's being brought in. So let's say if the dad is having to pay $500 a month child support, if you are taking that $500 from dad and giving it straight $500 to mom for the child, you have not, all the work that you guys are doing is not generating any revenue. So there has to be a cut. The child support agency has to be capitalizing on like the middleman fee or the cut from somewhere in order to continue operating.
Let me tell you this. Okay, so you remember how I said child support went from just helping welfare cases to non-welfare cases?
Yeah.
Who do you think it's easier to collect money from? Welfare or non-welfare cases?
Non-welfare.
People with money. Yeah, so if you're non-welfare, you have an above-the-table job. My job as a child support officer is, if this guy is a you know, a normal, hardworking, good, upstanding citizen, all I got to do is just send a wage assignment to his job, and the money comes in. I never have to look at the case again. But for the welfare cases, those are the ones I got to try making calls on, and hopefully, you know, we could get some payments, and I got to sit here and try to discuss with these guys and give them incentives to pay, or they'll just never answer the phones. So most of the money we collect, which feeds into these performance measures, right, which leads to incentive payments back to states, are actually coming from these welfare cases. Or what I'm saying is like bigger amounts. Like, so if a guy has a good job and you apply the child support calculator to it, you're going to get a higher child support amount, right? So now we collected $2,500 from this guy, and that money is going to go to our performance measures versus like a $400 or $250 child support amount from somebody that's a welfare family and us not getting the money. So at the end of the day, it really looks like we're doing a great job because we're harassing normal middle-class American families for money.
Basically, you're punishing the fathers that are capable, that have jobs, and that are basically responsible. They are basically having to carry the burden for the fathers that are not, because you're collecting so much money from them in a way to offset the money that you're not collecting, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So Exactly, right? Because then it's buffering up the number. So if you look at child support and how much it used to collect, the graph looks really good. Like, oh, we'd have our end of year thing. We collected this much money this year. Let's all pat ourselves on the back. We had a great fiscal year. If you look at the history of it, you can see that those changes really help to buffer the bottom line dollar amount of how much money is collected, and they would rather you pay through the system. So it shows that way. There's a lot of different pots where money falls in and all this kind of stuff. There's good retrospectives written on the whole process that are congressional that, you can read and stuff. And it shows kind of what percentages are incentive payments, what percentages are used to sustain certain programs and where they go. But the state has a big incentive to do that. And I feel like we're kind of in this trap place where if you took away the the whole welfare system tomorrow, you would end up with a lot of people on the streets. So we're kind of paying a lot of people to stay out of our way, even though there has been an uptick in homelessness lately, but at least from what I see. So it's just, we are like deep into the weeds on this system, and we have taken away, what I would argue is that we have taken away families' ability to self-regulate reproduction for themselves and put it in the hands of the state. And so people aren't really incentivized to stay together in the same way anymore that they used to be.
And I guess, like, real quick, I wanted to ask, because I know you're big on dowries and bride price. That was the other thing I wanted to get in with you.
Yeah.
Do you think the fact that we as a nation and a culture have moved away from that practice?
I would say so. Yeah, I think so. That would be true.
Plays a huge role in like the overall outcome of the failure of marriages.
Absolutely. Those marriage transactions, that's the umbrella term, has that, in my opinion, that is a regulator on hypergamy. Okay. And what we did is we switched the marriage of reason, as they used to call it, to what's called the love match, or a marriage of passion. So you substituted the romantic ethos as the driving force for matchmaking, instead of the endowments from the family, property, and all these kinds of other consideration that, truth be told, and this includes the West, people used to look at when they created matches for people. I mean, I'm talking going all the way back to 2,000 years ago. I mean, ancient Athens did this, and then it slowly spread to all of Europe as time went on. But yeah, if I was going to give you a brief, what happened is that when I stopped working at child support, I started looking deeply into the history of child support, more so than I ever did while I was on the job. Because I was just like, how did we get here? And it's just like, it just didn't, I just kept looking and going back and back and back. And I went back so far, even to like Hammurabi's Code, and I kept seeing the mention of this bride price and dowry stuff. And eventually it revealed itself to me. I'm like, what is this? So I decided to do like a deep dive into that. And I looked at every single paper I can find or get my hands on, or book. I got a bunch of newspaper clippings from back in the day. And I discovered that fundamentally this was like a support, or essentially the ground of how we did marriage in our society. And I would say the West was built on the dowry system. And once you remove that, it led to kind of where we're at now, where marriage is just a disaster.
How can you give like a little brief for the listeners that have nowhere like to come? Like, when you say how long ago it was, how long was it? And then like where are we today? How has that affected it?
Sure. Like, and just to clarify, do you mean like how long ago it used to be
the dowry
practiced?
system was removed?
Okay.
Yeah, like when was it in practice, and when did it fall out of practice?
So the epicenter of where it started to get removed was in England and the US. Okay. And this is because industrialization and modernization hit them first, because back when we were like mostly agrarian, it's not like you're going to be like, screw you, mom and dad, we're going to go live in this $500 a month apartment over here, and I'm going to go get a job, and her and I love each other, and screw you guys. Like, you actually had to set up the household properly, and so this required a wealth transference at the time of marriage in order to set up a new household, in order to have a successful marriage. Okay. And you know how you always hear, like feminists might say, well, women never inherited. The sons only got the inheritance. That's not true. Women got their inheritance as the dowry. It's just that they have their inheritance pre-mortem at the time of marriage, and then the son gets his inheritance on the back end. So this gives the family a couple boosts. But around industrialization and modernization, things started to change. Culture started to change. You had the printing press. You had romantic novels going out. You had people making money in a different way where they can afford to finance love, essentially. And this, and I have like a lot of newspaper articles where it's like English people are debating, should we go back to the dowry system? And they'll look over at the French, and the French are still doing the dowry. They didn't get rid of dowry till the 60s, 1960s. Where the English started moving away in the 1800s, pretty much. Like in the 1700s, they're still doing it. And then things start to change for them in the 1800s. It's still happening on some level, but then the culture's starting to change. And then things like chivalry, it starts to become not chivalrous for a man to expect a dowry from his woman, or from his future wife, or whatever, his betrothed. And he would just pay for everything. And then you start to see stuff in discussions about how people know love matches end in just a lot of arguments and fighting once the real world really hits them, or the husband's resentful that like, oh, the wife didn't bring in anything and all this stuff. With the U.S., from the inception of the U.S., when they broke off for the Church of England, they allowed divorce. So it's kind of funny because divorce was sort of born with the U.S.
Yeah.
And back then, for most of, Christian Europe, there was no divorce. There was annulments, so you would go to the ecclesiastical court, and there were reasons to get an annulment. Maybe there wasn't consent, or there was a consanguinity that was within a degree that wasn't allowable, or insanity. So the reason wasn't that in consent. And there were just reasons for that. Maybe they're married to somebody else. So for a long time, from the Roman handoff, from the Roman period to the Christian period, there was no divorce, just annulments. And prior to that, there was divorce in, the Roman times and all that. Divorce was a normal part.
Even back in biblical times, there was divorce.
Yeah, there was. I mean, that was, it wasn't like this end all be all. But then, like as time goes on and as Christianity goes from being a sect to being the state religion, officially of the empire, management of things started to change. And, that's when you started seeing a move away from polygyny towards monogamy and all these kinds of things. And so England and the U.S., it starts to move away there. The U.S. starts off like this, and that's how we get our at-fault divorce system. Because basically the U.S. is like, we're going to allow divorce. And it's like, we haven't had divorce in our civilization for 2,000 years. How are we supposed to do this? Yeah. So that's how we got our at-fault divorce system, which then went away in the late 60s. Well, started to. I mean, it was just California in the late 60s. And then you got no-fault divorce, which has been a disaster. But what happened is dowry used to regulate hypergamy, because women that had a appropriately sized dowry would match with men that had a good potential future, or they had a good income, or they were going to have a good inheritance, or both. So when the bargain would happen between families, they would say, this is our son or daughter wants this. Our daughter wants to get married. This is their marriage portion. It's another word for the daughter, or for the dowry. And the matchmakers and stuff like this would there would be this marriage negotiation up front. Then when the match was made, the household would be established based off of that. And then the man steps into his role of being the provider and all this kinds of stuff. And all that makes sense. The dowry was always the woman's property. But it was under the management of the man in a coverture world, right? Then it was like the Married Woman's Property Act in the mid 1800s or early 1800s in England that finally said, oh no, a woman's property is her property. So what that did is that made it so the man didn't have usufruct over her dowry anymore. Meaning that if she brought as dowry some type of account that has some whatever amount that comes out of it, or land that has a harvest every year, the husband manages that amount and can use that amount of money for whatever. Or her family says, okay, this guy has trained as an artisan. We're going to pay for his shop, and now he's going to run the shop and support the family. And, that was the dowry. So there's all these things for the way that it works.
What I'm hearing is, in a nutshell, is that basically when feminism was introduced, which was the 1820s, that's where the system started to erode.
They hate dowry. Yeah. I even have so I'm sorry, my mind's going to so many places, but essentially hypergamy was regulated that way.
It was a buffer. It was a buffer for hypergamy.
It was a check on hypergamy.
Yeah.
And then once we removed the dowry, we said, okay, we have at-fault divorce now. At-fault divorce is a way of saying we're going to allow open hypergamy. So these people can marry each other because they love each other. She doesn't bring anything but the clothes on her back, also called the pauper marriage. This guy's Mr. Hero over here, and he's going to, I got all the money, baby, don't worry about me. And you at least had at-fault, which was like, okay, these two are going to get married. Here's how it works, though, okay? So if you cheat, if somebody is at fault, and let's say she cheats
That's
on
the
him.
injured party. That's the one that breaches the contract.
Yeah, she breaches the contract. He's the injured party. We're not going to, custody is going to go to him first. The assets of the marriage are going to stay with him, and then fine, they're divorced after that. If he did it, then it's going to be the other way around, whatever. Then when you pulled out that card and now you were left with no fault divorce, now you have open hypergamy with people getting married.
With
and
no
at any moment,
consequence.
yeah, because what you have is the establishment of this community property that says it doesn't matter who brought what. This is the community property of the marriage. And you can divorce unilaterally. It doesn't matter who did what. Now we're in an amoral system, right? Morality has been removed completely. Okay. And so now you have things like the guys grumbling and complaining because they're like, I worked my whole life for this. I provided everything, including the establishment of the household, like the tradcons want you to do. And they're mad about it. So that's the first part of the story. The other part that you need to understand about dowry is there's this thing called dowry and there's this thing called bride price.
Yes.
Renamed to bride wealth.
Two different
They're
things.
different. They are different, all right? And then if you go further back in the time, you have things like sister exchange, you have bride service, and then you have no marriage transaction, okay?
Mm-hmm.
For most of human history, most societies have had some kind of marriage transaction at the time of marriage, okay? So
yeah, and it was between the families. It was a union, a uniting of this household with this household. It
creates an alliance.
Yes, for the benefit, not for the marriage so much, but for the benefit of the collective of the two clans or two families, right?
I will say this. Yes, that's true, but it's not an arbitrary agreement, meaning that it isn't just like, oh, the bride price is going to be this amount someday, or it's going to be way less someday. Typically what you see from the and this is why they renamed bride price to bride wealth. A bunch of anthropologists came together in the 60s, and after they did this gigantic, fact-finding mission where we got the World Ethnographic Atlas of 1,167 pre-industrial societies where they looked at these and took data on all of them. They discovered that bride price isn't like you're just selling your daughter. It's not like a market rate. It's usually a uniform price within a bride price. So in any bride price societies, it's typically the same amount of money, okay? Because the way a bride price is supposed to work is you're supposed to pay a payment to their family, and they're supposed to now have enough to replace their daughter with another wife for another son in their family.
Yes.
And this is how you get polygyny also, right? Because everybody might be married in that family, but they'll say, okay, this person will have a second wife now. Usually in bride price paying societies, it'll be like one or a few things that they can use as a kind of currency for bride price. Like, that's where you get your cow.
I'll give you 2 goats.
Yeah, it'll be like a small herd of them or something like that. Now,
no. She only gets 2 goats because look, she's missing her teeth. You got that one's missing teeth and she got a lazy eye. She's only worth 2 goats.
Well, that goes away from the uniformity of the situation. But okay, so bride wealth, bride price has happened in societies that were less sophisticated than dowry paying societies. Okay, so the difference is the form of agriculture that they use. So in the Old Testament, you have the mohar mentioned a lot. That's the bride price.
Yes.
Dowry is arguably in there under words like shiluhim and zebed, but a lot less. Mm-hmm. It's by and large, it's bride wealth. Okay. And that happens in societies where women actually give the larger contribution to agriculture. And men do less in agriculture. So when you get married and you take away this woman from her family, they are losing her very real labor value on the farm.
Yeah.
Because back then they were using lighter tools for agriculture that a woman could use in her hands. Then they switched to heavy agriculture, which was the plow. Okay. And with the plow, you can pretty much till acres and acres of land. And, you have animals pulling this, but it was pretty much men who had to do the plow because it takes a lot of burst strength. You got to keep these animals in a straight line. And what happened is women's contribution on the field was not as economically important as it used to be. Okay, so because you're making all these calories now, another thing about bride wealth societies is that there isn't high earners versus low owners. People typically make around the same amount of money. And you see this in sub-Saharan Africa and all that stuff. But there isn't really private property, and there really isn't that much stratification of wealth, which means there isn't a guy who makes this much versus a middle class versus a poor. It's about the same. And most of the land, since they can't work the land enough, is held in corporate by the tribe, right? So it's not like my family owns this specifically and yours doesn't. It's the entire tribe owns this land in corporate, and everybody is free to work it or has some stake in the claim, okay? When it switches over to the plow, you start to see all this money being made because you're able to make all this food. Not everybody has to worry about it, and you get specialization, and you start to get very rich men with a lot of land holdings, rich families, I should say. And then you start to get medium land holdings. Then you start to get minimum land holdings. Then you start to get a kind of proletariat class that owns no land. So you have rich to poor, okay? And you have private property ownership, and you have specialization and all these things. And what is born out of that is that bride wealth switches over to monogamy and the dowry system. So the dowry system walks hand in hand with monogamy, and bride wealth walks hand in hand in polygyny. So it's really these economic factors that led to this change. Okay, so now we have monogamy and dowry going through Europe for pretty much, almost 2,000 years until we get to, we want to do divorces again, and romantic love comes in because the economic system changes again, with industrialization. And now people start to look at things differently. They have a little bit more freedom in their environment in terms of how they're going to live. You get these mega cities where I can just go rent an apartment and just be a playboy out here, do whatever I want to do at the beginning of modernization. Then we get into no fault. My argument is that things are so expensive now, and we're heading back into this kind of situation. Like, you hear all these millennials complaining, I can't afford a house.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. You got the trad cons yelling at men.
First-time home buyers now is 40 years old.
Yeah, and if the man, like the trad con says, needs to provide everything and she doesn't, you're going to miss taking advantage of this fertility window as far as a marriage is going. So I know it sounds crazy to say bring the dowry back, and I kind of joke about it, and I've even said I don't think we can. But I look back at this because I'm like, oh, if we need to establish a household with a man and a woman and we want to do it young, there needs to be some kind of very real material contribution from both sides in order to do that. Especially
and you would say, wouldn't you say, because you know how the father of the bride was responsible to pay for the wedding? Now, wouldn't that be like a form of dowry? Because we, as the daughter or the father of the daughter that's getting married, we want her to be set up for success, and we are going to cover the expense and provide these wedding gifts that would help, start you guys off on your way. So since neither of these two would have household goods, these wedding gifts would be acting as household goods to help cover.
To establish the household. And I've heard that before. It's not like this formal transfer. It's kind of this cultural remnant or carryover from what they were doing anyways, because the bride side, a typical dowry, and this is not for rich people, but for middle income people, would have been a house. And the bride's father would have purchased a house for the family, which is kind of crazy to think about. They were even doing this.
That's wild.
They were doing this even into 1970s Greece. The dowry in Greece did not end until about the early 80s. So prior to that, they were still practicing the dowry system, which is kind of amazing because they were already one of the first to do it in ancient Athens, and it led that whole way down. But so, with that whole system, the bride's, family would do that. So I look at that as a kind of cultural carryover from those days. But the function of it, in some ways, depending on if it's just paying for an elaborate wedding that doesn't exactly establish a household, then it's missing the function of the dowry. It's more about just celebrating something.
The spirit of it is there, though. The fact that the responsibility was on the bride's family to make sure that the wedding and the things that they were started off on this marriage was secure, with the gifts and the function of it.
Yes. In some ways, yes, you can say that. You can say that. For me, the real spirit of it lies in the negotiation prior to establishing the marriage. You know, and
And the fact that we don't have that now, what we have done in a way, would you think that fathers have dropped the ball on their responsibility? They're not
it's
fulfilling their responsibility by not
well, yes,
enforcing the dowry.
I will say yes, but I will add on that I don't want to just blame dads here. I don't want to put it all on men.
Well, no, but at the end of the day,
and I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm not saying you're
Yeah.
doing that. But from what I've read in the history, yeah, a lot of times, you know, the father would manage that, but the source of the dowry came from more than one place. Yeah, it would come from the father's work in a lot of places. You can say that. It would also come from the mother's side too, because she might have stuff left over from her own dowry or still there that would then contribute to the kids' pots. Grandma might come in and, you know, get a dowry going. It could come from the charity of the church. I have a newspaper article that talks about the Pope giving out dowries for women. It could come from women working themselves. So if you were in a poorer family, and that's the thing about the dowry, it was from top to bottom. It's not like just rich people. But what she might work as a maidservant in a richer family's house, and what the contract would be with that, they would pay her dowry once the contract term is over. So you see that a lot also. Women are now working, they're forced to work in order to save, because the reason I call dowry self-regulation is because what they're saying is if you're going to enter into this enterprise of marriage, you need to prove you are able to have a household that has the health to sustain itself. If you don't have the commensurate dowry amount, this house has a very high chance of failing that you're trying to establish. Now we have a burden on the public because we have these kids here from a marriage that should have never happened, which sounds mean to say.
No, but
there would be this
because then,
minimum of dowry, right? So dowries can range from extremely extravagant in terms of cost if you have kings and queens getting married to a minimum amount for people that are, you know, peasants.
And it was more of an accountability factor. It was to make sure that they had skin in the game.
Exactly. It's contribution.
If you fail, it's going to cost you more than it's going to cost the state or the community.
Yes, and the thing about the dowry too was that one of the laws, typically if a separation did happen, say the marriage got annulled or a divorce, the woman's dowry was always her property. The husband just had management of it. If the divorce happened, they would have to pay the dowry back to her. She would go back to her house with that. If she committed adultery on him and they had children, then the dowry would stay in that household. So it was also an incentive against monkey branching, you can say, right? And then also, it's less for monkey branching would also have less of a chance to work, because if her dowry is invested in this household, why would this guy? It's not a rational decision to then take this dowerless woman here, because you're throwing away your marriage prospects, basically.
Yeah, he doesn't get any potential insurance clause in case she acts, she misbehaves or she, acts up.
Yes,
because
exactly.
If she's willing to, because it also be like, if she's willing to cheat on him and jeopardize losing this dowry, I'm not going to be getting a dowry if I stay with her, because if I choose romantic love and screw my family and her and I both love each other, that's great. That is the romantic ethos. That is the lust kind of love. That is the fantasy story of love. That is not the familial love, just to differentiate types of love. That's the her on a pedestal and me having to give her the world kind of That's
love.
the horniness. That's that.
Yes. And we see that after a few years, the love tends to go away. And that even nowadays we see that. That's where we get the I'm not happy, I'm bored.
I need
That's
to find
where we
myself.
get the love doctors. How do I get it going again? All these things. But when both people have a mutual respect and the proof is there from the mutual contribution from both spouses, it's different. So the reason this is so interesting to me is because I've seen a ton of divorce judgments. I used to look at it. My job was to look at this calculator for 5 years, which looked at one person's side and the other parent's side, and spit out this money and see what the assets were and see what alimony was. Then when I saw this system, it looked very elegant to me because it made so much sense. It's not a hypergamous system. It's a balanced scales, and it makes everything worth it. It's like, it's a respect to the husband. It's like, okay, you're going to be the provider, which I'm not even arguing against. But what we're going to do is we're going to put some fertilizer and water on you so you can be the best provider you can possibly be.
Yeah, like we're going to try to set you up for success.
Yes, and you're going to respect your wife because of what she did, especially in the beginning and what she brought in. This is going to create an alliance of the families. Another interesting thing I have that I've seen in the literature and the writings here is that in older times, women who got married needed a dowry, and if they didn't have one, that wasn't considered a wife. That was a concubine, essentially.
Yes.
That's the difference. And now a concubine, you can say, is a marketplace of paying for a woman. You can say this concubine cost this much or that much or whatever it is.
But like the level of security is not there with the concubine, although they are acknowledged and they are attached to a man socially and exclusively, but they don't get the same benefits as a wife.
No, the wife proper is the one that brought the dowry, and she has different rights, and her children have different rights and different claims on the inheritance of the man. So that goes back like a real long way. And, marriage has definitely is this institution that has to change in some ways to fit the culture and the economics of a landscape that it exists in at any given time. So it's like you see bride wealth in old days, then you see dowry, and you see these changes. I think we're kind of going through the birthing pains of another kind of shift here, basically. Because what we're doing now is not working in a no-fault system. You can't have a hypergamous thing like this that makes sense for men in a thing where women could just bring
because it's not incentivized. It doesn't. It tips the scale, the responsibility or the risk all on one party, and it's not equal in the sense of like they're both going in there. Gia, with your experience in family law, like with your time in family law, would you think that maybe if we implemented a dowry system now, to where some form of dowry system, to where if both parties have this equal risk, that could either cause people to put a pause on family law?
I agree, but unfortunately what we have is everybody's incentivized by greed. So there's a pyramid system within the state that they're making, instead of the money going to the husband and the wife to help them live out their life, it's now going to make everybody else within the system rich, right? So they're not going to implement a dowry when that's going to take money out of their pockets.
Sorry, Glenn, go on.
No, I'm just go ahead, because I'm thinking about this.
Yeah, so the dowry is specific. Like when you see marriage as an institution that is enshrined in the law, dowry was also this institution that was enshrined in the law. And, the dowry was something that was recognized by the law, and it operated in the law. Like the husband couldn't just take the dowry and then sell the farm because he felt like it. There were very real regulations on how that money was to be used and spent, which we're all, we're missing a lot of that. A lot of places have outright abolished it or prohibited it at the request and behest of feminist groups who have said it's oppressive to women, when it's not. It simply just balances the scales.
Well, it just holds them accountable.
It makes them have to contribute something to the marriage, to be invested in the marriage and take it seriously. When I look at it, it's interesting because I think if I was going to apply dowry principles to a situation today, how would you best do that? I see the law as having created these other avenues to paternity that now exist outside of marriage. Do you remember how earlier in the conversation, marriage used to be the thing that presumed paternity, and it was the benefit for men. It said, hey, these are your children, right? Legally speaking. When marriage started to crumble down like that, we had to create these like legal structures that exist next to it that have nothing to do with marriage. So now we have the VDP. So I can just walk into a hospital and sign, and that child is my child, even though I was never married to that woman. We have the courts that can default someone, whatever it happens to be. So it's like, I think you can have a quasi dowry system. So let's say I have a buddy. All right. Well, I think of my buddy. I always think of this guy, but I remember back, we graduated college and he just finished his degree in electrical engineering and he's got a good job. It's starting at $100K and he's getting his master's at night and he's got a good career trajectory. Okay. There's this woman over here. She's 19, 18, whatever. Her parents are like, we can pay for her college now, or we can put that money into a house and then tie these two together and offer a proposal. See, that's a real proposal. A proposal is not getting down on one knee. A proposal is saying, hey, this is our daughter. This is my son. This is what he's doing. This is her endowment. If you put that into the house and put their name on it, now they're tied together and he's paying the rest of the mortgage on the house. You can say the parents put $100,000 down payment on the house, or even $200K, whatever the deal is.
Yeah.
Let's say $100K. Okay. That's a significant amount of money. And that will, I think, incentivize both people to stay. Now, the guy could be, a dirtbag and leave, unfortunately, and split the house money or whatever. But if they have kids, then the whole family law system kicks into play.
Yeah.
As the woman
And
gets
he's not
older,
incentivized. No, men are not incentivized to leave, period.
They're not. Yeah. But she's disincentivized in some ways too, because I'm just saying, like, worst case scenario, because people are scumbags. But unfortunately, some people are, not everybody. But, she's incentivized because it's like her parents put this money into the house. And if she decides to pull the ripcord, at least when the house splits up, all right, fine, put it back on the market. The rest of the mortgage will be what it is, and we'll split whatever's in the house. That would, at least he's not losing everything. So and what it also does for the woman is it makes her more attractive on the marriage market. A problem you see in the manosphere is you have this quintessential high value man that can't be wrestled. The real problem is there's the women being promiscuous, but the high value man also needs to be wrangled into a monogamous position because he's up there and he's like, why should I be monogamous? I can just be with all these women. There's no incentive. I made all this money, whatever. They ignored me or something when I was younger. And why am I going to be monogamous now? If a family comes and makes a deal and says, hey, get married to our daughter monogamously, here it is. It would be irrational for him to say, let me just stay on this merry-go-round. I can actually do something. This is going to benefit both of us economically in a way that makes sense. And then it also solves the problem of the handoff of property. Because the dowry system helps keep the children of the families in the same class. If you have many children with a bunch of different women and the inheritance gets split up, that puts them down a class depending on what they do, right? So another thing also is class mobility, right? Class mobility is more able to happen in our times, where in prior times it wasn't. I think a lot of the hubbub of lately is that class mobility has got harder, right? Just like it's harder to get into a house. Some people can still do it. That's where you get this self-improvement grind set in the manosphere. Some people are going to become your top 1%. But betting on that is no way to have a functioning society. You need to have a system that works for everybody from top to bottom.
Because if you don't have a system that works for everybody, then you're not going to have a society that's going to be productive overall.
No, yeah, because once these other people check out, which is what you see with a lot of the folks checking out who are like, I'm not going to play this game anymore. Yeah. That's going to have a huge effect on the economy and all this kind of stuff. I mean, you want people married because now they're bought into the game or the system, so to speak. You have the house and the mortgage, you're raising the kids, you're being a good consumer, you're stimulating the economy, people are going to work, all these things. But yeah, so that's the only problem with the manosphere is it's not looking at the long-term deal, I don't think.
Well, I don't think the manosphere, in my opinion, today is designed for long-term family creation.
Yes, I would agree with you.
I think it blames feminism and it blames female promiscuity for the lack of marriageable or quality women. Yeah. But at the same time, the advice or the prescriptions that content creators in the space give seem to only be ways to capitalize on female promiscuity and
capitalize on. I agree with that. Yeah, and that's what it is, because a lot of it's a reaction, because it's like, okay, especially, I remember in those early days of Reddit, a lot of it was like, okay, well, this guy, he's being an orbiter, and they're starting to become self-aware of these disadvantaged positions that they have with women. And then the red pill comes in terms of how do I maximize sexual attraction, or how do I, what behavior patterns can I take advantage of to get these people attracted to me? Okay, so now someone's getting laid and he's spinning plates, TM, so to speak, right? That leads to, in my opinion, a kind of wall on the other end where it's like, yes, you do know how to do that, but they're not incentivized to then leverage themselves into a situation for a long term. So that's where it stops. And it's mostly about they used to have this phrase on the old days called enjoy the decline. I don't know if you remember that. Oh yeah. So it kind of tells you right there what it's looking at.
It's all hedonistic.
Yeah, and you know,
More like nihilistic.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
you could say
nihilistic,
that.
but the approach is hedonistic in the sense of you
Mm.
are not looking at, you're not. So there was a saying back in the day was you want to leave her better than you found her, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, yeah, if it ends, that's fine, but you don't want to damage her. You want to leave her at least better than you found her. That's no longer a concern anymore. It's like, get your dick wet, bro. W, right? Like that's like the
Yeah, and
hedonistic
that,
sense.
even that to me, like, I get it. Listen, I get it, and I'm no one to talk. I'm just saying that, like, you can only do that for so long before you step into a landmine anyways. Like, you see this with some of the people, even somebody like Andrew Tate, right? I mean, that's the
Yep.
prognosis of that typically leads to stepping into a landmine, whether it's an accusation or a
Or an
pregnancy
actual,
over
yep.
here, or whatever the problem is going to be. It's going to happen on a long enough timeline. And I tend to look at this and say, where is the off ramp? Can there be an off ramp into some kind of you know, slow lane SUV living, so you're not on a motorcycle in the fast lane all the time, you know, in your life? And
Yeah.
what the manosphere does well, I think, is it teaches guys how to get to this higher value position, or at least a higher value than what they were before. But when it comes to negotiating that position, they don't really have a means to do that, because most of us don't even remember how the system used to be. And tradcons won't let you remember it, because they'll say, well, if you're masculine, then she shouldn't have to worry about anything. I think I might even mean Charlie Kirk, you know.
He did. He has said that. He's like, unfortunately, he said, you know,
Something about
before your
video
wife should
games.
never
That's
have
the
to
one I
worry about
remember.
finances. He said, your wife should never have to worry about finances before you buy anything for yourself. Your
Yeah,
wife
and it's
shouldn't.
like, I can understand the ethos of the provider role, and I'm not saying that that's even wrong, but they always leave out this part where, when it comes to the negotiation of the marriage, that the man, for
Who's
working this hard,
incentivized?
he's
Who's
supposed to be incentivized
yeah.
into this monogamous role. There's supposed to be something for that says, hey, we live these values, and the proof that we live these values is in our contribution here. You know, because this is where you get the tradcon cosplayer that professes to have values of whatever faith, and I just want to make sourdough bread at home, and it all sounds nice, and wear overalls and pick up, you know, eggs from the chickens in the morning. But that can easily be changed later on, the value
well,
system.
it's not realistic. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not realistic.
Gia, this plays right into what you were saying the other day. What was your go ahead and say your projection for 2026, what we were going to see?
So you're going to see a lot of videos on Twitter with these girls saying, I want to have babies, and women were made to have babies, and this kind of rhetoric, right? And then Elon's going to follow them. He's going to retweet them, because this is the new trend. It's like, just like the AI videos of all these guys creating AI virtual of women, they're not even real, saying, oh, you know, a woman's job is to stay home and take care of her man. Like, you see these videos floating around, and they're all fake. And they're actually higher virality than the real accounts. So this is a trend.
I believe it. I don't know if you heard this term, but like, when I talk with the folks on the channel, and when I do my live streams, we always call it cosplaying. Like, there's this level of cosplaying, and the red pillars will say it comes at like the wall time, and then they'll start to switch up the strategy in order to secure the long-term deal. And then later on, you know, that 7 years comes, and not to be super negative about it, but then, you know, things start to change, or the man at least feels like he has the sort of Damocles over him now, because he's contributed everything to this marriage. She hasn't. I mean, there's a question I feel like you can even ask women. It's like, if they're 27, 28 and they want to get married, it's like, have you saved for your marriage? You know, do you have debt or no debt?
So
like, what have you done?
I've said
you know?
that actually several times. I've said that we're not going to go backwards. That's why especially working in family law for 5 years, I'm telling you that dowry system, I mean, as much as we want things to go backwards, it's not going to happen. So
I agree with you there.
I think the way forward, and the way that we have to deal with women, is that they need to understand from the get-go, as a man, like, you have to make her understand, listen, if you're not coming into this marriage already providing, like, I know in my own marriage, I bought the house, I bought the cars, like, I came in already providing, right? And if she's not prepared to do that, then she's not prepared to be married.
See,
because
that's a respectable marriage.
And I think, honestly, I really do think that that's the way forward. We have to take what was and what is, and we have to move forward. We're not going to go
Take
backwards.
the best of what
Yeah,
was in the past and try to make a hybrid version of that will
yes,
fit today.
exactly. Some kind of inspiration there. And there's almost this weird olive branch or kind of like that you can give towards the feminists a little bit. I mean, in the sense of like, listen, it's not like oh, no working or whatever it happens to be, but it's like your contribution to the marriage is valued, but we need to know you're serious about the marriage.
Well,
You
yeah,
know what I
because
mean?
it's like you're like their demand for equality, right? We want to be equal. We're equal in value, or whatever, or
Yeah.
we're well. Then if you want me to look at you as an equal, then I'm expecting you to take an equal amount of risk.
Yeah, why should the
Entering
man
in
always
this.
be the investing side?
And they should not be considered not being chivalrous or being,
Yeah.
looked as weak upon if we're going to respect you as an equal.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up chivalry, and romantic chivalry has a large part to play in the shift, because when romantic
I think
chivalry
it's
came on,
folklore.
well,
The word
when
itself.
romantic chivalry came on the fray, it was really only something that the rich people did, and it happened outside of marriage. It was kind of adulterous. And then time went on, and you got the printing press, and then suddenly books were cheap and easy to make. And aside from like polyglot Bibles, another very famous type of book that was being printed were these tales of chivalry and the romantic knight and these kinds of things. And these things were spreading like hot fire all the way into the New World even. And then so as modernization came on the fray, and people were maybe able to try to be able to afford this romantic thing a little bit better than they ever were, it started to change that way. And now the manosphere, the manosphere knows pretty well. And, Coach Craig Adams will have this phrase where he says, men are in love, women are in business, or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, hold that thought real quick, because
Yeah.
you know what we have? We have Michael Sartain in the back, and we're going to bring him on up.
Michael Sartain. Okay, yeah.
This guy.
I know Michael Sartain. Hey, Michael.
What's up, Mike?
Guy. Hey, what's going on, guys?
Hey,
Nice to
nice to
meet you.
see you.
Hey, nice to see you guys. What's going on? What are we talking about now?
We're talking
Go ahead,
about
please.
marriage laws, chivalry, dowry system, why that ended, why that was a beneficial aspect in marriage, because how it kept everybody honest, how it had a hypergamous check in place,
Sure.
and what can we do moving forward to reestablish some of that checks and balance.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one thing throughout history, the majority, and this is coming from like an evolutionary biology standpoint, you guys should read Joe Heinrich. He's evolutionary biologist at Harvard. He's fantastic. And then obviously Dr. Buss, David Buss, who's an evolutionary psychologist at UT Austin. If you read their books, you'll find that the majority of human existence was polygynous, meaning there were a few men at the top who had several wives or several partners, and there was a large group of men at the bottom who had no partners. And in fact, if we look at the anthropological record, we find about 40% of men and 80% of women throughout history have reproduced. Throughout history, there have been surplus men. The answer, once we started having nation states, and these nation states quickly started to realize the key to our power is a larger population. The actual trick was to have as many men and as many women pregnant, having children as possible. The answer to do that is not polygyny. The answer to do that is enforced monogamy. And so that's where you get a couple. Now, that's not actually the where marriage comes from. Marriage is like a tax-free transfer of wealth between two families. Basically, you're able to keep wealth within certain areas. This is also the reason why the Catholic Church does not allow bishops to marry, because they don't want them inheriting wealth or inheriting land. And so now you have this tax-free transfer of wealth, and only nobility had last names. Like we all in America, we have first names and last names. It used to not be like that. Instead, you were Jack Builder, you were Jack Smith.
You were Jack of your trade, whatever.
Yeah, you were Jack of your trade, exactly. But if you were a Plantagenet or you were a Windsor, those people were nobility, right? And so in that situation, it was the nobles who would get married and they would share wealth. But over time, what happened is these nation states start to realize enforced monogamy. Encouraged. It's not enforced. You could still be single in England in the 1560s if you wanted to, but encouraged monogamy. What it did was cause more people to be pregnant, more women to be having children, so that now England would have more people in their nation state than France would. so that Russia would have more humans to fight in their battles than Germany would. That was the whole point behind it. And then China, same thing. China was a great example of this, where they outpopulated their enemies, over time. So that's essentially what would happen in those situations. And so over time, the idea of marriage is not for love. It is marriage is totally something that's set up by your family. It's very similar to what that you still see in India today. And then around the time of maybe the 16th century, we start reading the poets. We start reading like Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, when he writes Romeo and Juliet, a lot of people think of Romeo and Juliet as like this love story. It is not a love story.
It's a tragedy.
It's a tragedy. It's a dark comedy. It's this point where he's saying, hey, you fucking idiots, you didn't listen to your parents and now you're both dead. Let's listen to our parents instead of thinking about fucking whoever we're attracted to. That was the point of the story. But today we retranslate that story to be a love story. That's not what it was.
Romanticize it. Like
Correct.
The fact that you would die for her. Like,
correct.
Yeah.
And so, and then we get into the 1900s, and then this horrible company called Hallmark comes out, and what do? They start commoditizing this free choice of love that men and women have with each other, and then we get into the sexual revolution, post 1972 with the birth control pill, etc. And now what we've done is we've taken this thing, we've completely perverted it. It used to be when my grandparents got married in the 1920s, or they got married to survive the Dust Bowl. They got married because they needed lots of children in order to live, in order to survive. Before the year 1850, half the Earth's population died before the age of 5. And so what we've done is we've taken these old institutions and we've turned them into like TikTok reels. We've taken these women, they want to be married, but they don't want to be wives. And so that's what's happened is we've sold them this idea that throughout history, it was Romeo and Juliet. Throughout history, it was Cinderella and the handsome prince that would come sweep her off her feet. That was just something that's been invented in the last 100 years to sell tickets to go to Disneyland. That's basically what it is. And so we've romanticized marriage and love to be something that it isn't. Love for me is someone who's willing to sacrifice for me. It's not a red hot, fiery emotion. It's respect and support for my business. That's what love is. Love is irrationality is not love. Irrationality does not make sure the children are fed. Irrationality does not take the children to school. Rationality does that. That's why I tell men to be very careful about who they pick to marry, because again, you want to have kids with someone who picks fights with you because she had a dream. That makes sense. Like that's crazy, And so what you'll find is
the sex might be fun, but it's not worth it in the long run.
That would be called a love match or a marriage of passion versus a marriage of reason, as they used to call it back then.
Yeah, Glenn, it's always fun. You're right, but besides
that,
you're right about that part. But the point is what we think about it. And by the way, do whatever you want. I'm not telling people to not get married. I'm just saying what you've been sold as marriage is something that came from Epcot Center. What you've been sold as marriage is something that came from Hallmark. It came from Disneyland. It's not marriage. There's not the world doesn't work that way. That's not what happens. Marriage is like sacrifice to the death for your partner and your children. Marriage today now is a ceremony you get to propose and you get to show on TikTok for views. That's what it's become.
Well, it's gone from family-centric to gynocentric, you can say, is what marriage is now.
Well, yes.
I think from a spending standpoint, I think that's true. I definitely think that's true, yeah.
So, Shah, before we let you go, because we have a show with Michael right after this, I wanted to ask you this because you brought up the manosphere.
Sure.
And since Mike works in, not works in the manosphere, but he's red pill adjacent, like me.
I've seen some of Michael's stuff before. Yeah. Michael's been everywhere in the manosphere.
They just keep asking me to come on.
You're just an innocent victim here, but what role do you see that the manosphere space playing as that's productive, or is it destructive to the alleged goal of nuclear family? Because that's what we know we have lost. So how is it being productive, or is it destructive to it?
I see the manosphere as two strains, at least originally. And one of them is kind of like Paul Elam's, MGTOW sort of going against gynocentrism, men's rights focused type of red pill. Then there's more of the PUA intersexual dynamics type of red pill, which is
also like Mike.
I would say not focused on family law and these kinds of things. It's more about what I would call, increasing sexual market value, understanding how to cultivate attraction, you know, with women and stuff like that. And I think the manosphere by and large has kind of moved away from the men's right side, and it's more about the pickup artist side of it and the attraction intersexual dynamic side of it. In that way, what I say is that it focuses more on the short term or low leverage dating, as I like to call it. It's not focused on the long term marriage deal or high leverage dating. So that's how you get this high value man, which will spin plates or not be monogamous or whatever it happens to be. So, you know, that old maxim in the old Reddit days of the red pill, which was enjoy the decline, enjoy the decline. I think it's largely based out of that, but it's not so much focused on the long-term deal between men and women.
Okay. And Gia, do you have a follow-up question for him? Or
no, I want to know, like, okay, so from your experience and what you've seen and working in the system, and now in your own experience, just with women in general, what do you think the solution is? Because we did touch on what I think would need to happen for women to start coming in with their own, you know, investments, basically. Well, what do you suggest to women to do going forward?
Out of all the divorces and divorce judgments I've ever read, the most painful ones for men were the ones that were married to women where they were the sole providers and the woman brought no true material contribution. If people are going to take the step into, you know, a formal marriage, I would say that the guys should be using all the game that they're learning from the intersexual dynamic sphere over here and using it to be a bit more pragmatic and reasoned about who they decide to marry and start a family with. And you have to be realistic that there's a high chance a divorce can happen. So when it happens, then at least the hit from the divorce isn't going to be as bad, and you can move on from there. When I look around the space, you know, I see that a lot of people will push back against this. Tradcons will say, well, it's the man's duty to provide basically everything, and it's not masculine if you expect a contribution from the woman's side. I disagree with that, and I think even RPers to some extent, but I don't think they're so focused on marriage too much. So I think what men need to do is, looking back at the past, looking back at how marriage used to be negotiated and bargained for in the old dowry system, you know, throughout most of Western history, is to bring back some of that ethos and say, okay, so you and I have $1 million enterprise. A house around here is $550,000. Bringing a kid from 0 to 18 is about $250,000 in the US. We're looking at $1 million enterprise we're about to embark on. How are we going to achieve that goal? I have a good job. I have some money. I have savings. What are you bringing into that $1 million enterprise? And if their answer is nothing, or I can't, then you can say, listen, this is going to be a tough sell. Can you get dad on the phone? Can you get grandma on the phone? Is your entire family going to just give you off with nothing but the clothes on your back? Or are you going to be respectable? So I think the negotiating process of this, when we look at the long-term deal, is something that men need to be firm on. And I think that can have a chance at changing how we do marriage.
That's actually a good idea.
I don't see that going over well with women, because most women are not very good at negotiation and business in general. But I do think, like, if you do have some background there, sometimes you can even see these answers without even having to ask them. Like, she should already come in with that sort of, she should be able to already come in with that kind of reasoning. And if she's not going to be rational enough to enter into a marriage to begin with.
I'll tell you this. The beautiful part about that is it will at least reveal to them what the problem is. And if there isn't enough suitable matches for that, or they can't, it'll reveal to them that they're not the table. They have come to the table just like the men. It'll reveal that not only are they a beggar, but their entire family are beggars, because they're expecting him to come and save the day. And if they can't do that, then the men can default on what the manosphere has to offer, which is living this type of high value man life where you live a polygynous style lifestyle, where you don't engage in the formal contract of marriage, or living and cohabitating with somebody. And I think men can do that and play this game of chicken and win for long enough. And actual families who care about their daughters and don't want their daughters on OnlyFans and profess to have religious values are going to be thinking about their daughters' marriages from a young age. So it could, I think, have some impact that'll be positive.
We would need it in the collective, though.
That's all part of the fun. So
yeah, you would have to get guys to leverage it somehow. And
because otherwise they'll just go to the guy that promises
right now. I think men are trapped by this idea of masculinity that especially tradcons feed them, and maybe even sometimes red pillars, some of them. But typically, where it's like, you need to be this high value guy, or not even high value, but you need to make enough money, which may as well almost be high value at this point, to fund this $1 million enterprise. And you need to do it in an environment that's toxic as far as the family law is concerned. And it's all on you. So it's no surprise to me that a lot of men have disengaged from this business deal because they don't want to take it. So I think the more men do that, the more attention it'll get. And I think this is a very reasoned argument that can push back on TradCon narratives. And
because there would be like, okay, the guys are going to be like, hey, it's not worth it for us no more.
No,
like,
it's not. And men are already saying that. I mean, that's what all the grumbling is about. And
that's why they're like, that's why even the conversation of like AI, sex robots, or these other alternatives, methods are being considered because they don't see the reward there.
Yeah. And ultimately, whether you're a man who makes a lot of money or not, if you want to have a family and do all these kinds of things, and you're not going to do this kind of surrogate type stuff where some woman in Brazil births your kid and then the kid comes back over here, you're going to have to find out. Like, I don't understand how men, they go and they become high value and then they don't know how to negotiate when it comes to a marriage. I think these families are out there. The old money is out there. People with decency exist to where once you become that NFL player, you don't have to marry the lady who had an OnlyFans for 6 months and decided to get rid of it so she can hop on the meal ticket.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Well, Shah, we want to thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, no worries.
Pleasure. We have so much more we could dive into, and we're going to have to expand. We have to do a part 2 on this because I really want to get into like the timeline of transitioning away from dowry, and what incentivized us, what made guys go, yeah, I want to make sure that we just do it for love, and not any, what there had to be something there.
We'll definitely talk about it, and then we can maybe go over sources and stuff next time, and it'll be fun to share screen and have fun discussions about that. So either way, thank you, Glenn. Gio, it was a pleasure having a conversation with you. And Michael, it was a pleasure meeting you today.
Good to meet you.
All right, thank you.
Well, guys, stay tuned until next time. Peace.
Glenn walks in with a dominant presence. Voice cuts deep like a sermon with essence. Gia steps up, pure elegant grace. Beauty with brains puts the world in its place. They light the mic, that truth ignites, burning through the fake in the dead of night. No labels, no camps, no tribal cage. They're carving out truth on an empty page. They're relentless warriors forged like Thor. Modern Viking knocking down every door. You can't pin them down, can't put them in a box. They'll stomp it flat and break your locks. Ceilings, please, they leap sky high, shattering limits you set with a lie. They'll lead in the way, believe that. No simps, no saints, no soft disguise. They see through the games and the alibis. They're not here to please, they're here to lead. Truth and balance, yeah, that's the creed. Was boom, energy of truth on fire. They're calling out the world's desire. From fake ideals to moral decay, they're lighting up the modern age. No one's safe, not the church, not fame. They're flipping the script, rewriting the game. Love and logic, heart and soul, saving the truth for this nation's soul.